Hello, I'm Rick Steves. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much. My name's Rick Steves, and I teach people how to travel in Europe. And one travel class I really like to give is this one, Travel as a Political Act, how travel broadens our perspective. Thank you so much for joining us. And I want to share right now the lessons I've learned from a lifetime of getting out of my comfort zone and hanging out with people who find different truths to be self-evident and God-given. I have spent a third of my adult life, 4 months a year for the last over 30 years, living out of a 9 by 22 by 14-inch carry-on-the-airplane size suitcase, hanging out with people who see things differently. And when I look back on it, it's been time and money very well spent. It's made me a citizen of this beautiful planet. When I was a kid, I struggled about what would be a good thing to do for my career. I wanted to contribute, I wanted to work hard. I was inclined to teach people how to travel. It's something I've been doing ever since I was a college kid. But I really struggled. Is this really the best thing to do with my work? And I didn't know if I really wanted to promote tourism. When I was a little kid, I don't know if you remember this, but way back when, in the 50s and the 60s, the image of travel for a lot of Americans was in the Caribbean. Rich white Americans on the deck of those fancy ships, throwing nickels into the bay and photographing what they called the little dark kids jumping for their nickels. And I just thought, that's an ugly kind of exercise. Travel should bring us together, and that was bringing us farther apart. And to this day, that notion of travel persists. For a lot of Americans, travel is still, see if you can eat 5 meals a day and still snorkel when you get into port. When I say that at a cruise convention, people they don't know if they should laugh or not. They kind of fidget nervously in their seats. Where's he going with this? Well, I don't say that in a judgmental way. I got no problem with cruising, but it's not travel. It's hedonism. It's hedonism. And I got no problem with hedonism. I'm a Lutheran. But when you travel, you should bring people together. I can just define that for myself. Travel is an activity that connects us better with the rest of the world. Now, the notion that travel is a valuable exercise is nothing new. 1,500 years ago, Muhammad said, "Don't tell me how educated you are, tell me how much you've traveled." Thomas Jefferson traveled, and he wrote that travel makes a person wiser, if less happy. Do you just want to be happy? Do you want to go to your grave with all sorts of scrapbooks with you with a barbecue bib on and serving up hot dogs? You know, that's okay, but you can reach out and learn about the world too. There's more to life than just being happy. You can understand the rest of this beautiful creation. Mark Twain traveled, and he wrote, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness." That's words of wisdom from Mark Twain. I've spent a lot of time traveling, and for me, travel connects us with the other 96% of humanity. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. Travel also helps us overcome fear. Have you noticed how fearful our society is these days? When I started traveling, people said, "Bon voyage." What do they say now? "Have a safe trip. We'll pray for you. Hope you make it back." I like to say, "I'm going to pray for you because I'm getting out of here." It's exciting to go over there, and if you really want this world to be a safer place, you will travel and help us all understand each other better. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And that's kind of what today's talk's all about, okay? This is travel as a political act. I wrote a book about this, Travel as a Political Act, and if I look back on my teaching, I didn't have a grand plan, but all I do is teach people how to travel. I've been doing that like a madman ever since I was a college kid. Now I've got 100 people working with me here in Edmonds. We got technology beyond our wildest dreams to amplify our content and our teaching. And if I look back at my teaching program and what I'm passionate about, again, I didn't have a grand plan, but there has been sort of some kind of logic to it. In the 80s, it was all about budget skills. That's the foundation, Europe through the back door. You know, how to catch the train, how to pack light, how to stay healthy, how to get a good hotel, and so on. In the 90s, I figured, well, you've got your bases covered. Now you don't go all the way to Europe just so you can, not be hungry. You go to Europe to appreciate the history, the art, the culture, the cuisine, the wine, and all that. And I was all excited about teaching Europe 101, how to enjoy the history and the art and the culture of Europe. I wrote a book about it. I was giving talks about it all the time. And then, after 9/11, I found my real interest in teaching is encouraging Americans and equipping Americans and inspiring, I hope, Americans to get out of their comfort zone and go to places where people see things differently. And, risk getting out of your comfort area and learning and broadening our perspective. And that's kind of what travel as a political act is all about. It's almost like Maslow's hierarchy of travel needs, if you think about it. First you get the basics, then you get a little higher, and then the pinnacle of the reason we travel is to bring home that greatest souvenir, a broader perspective. So let me talk about that today. My beat is Europe. That's where I go these days, because for me, Europe is the wading pool for world exploration. My favorite country is India. I love to travel in India. I love to travel in Southeast Asia, Central America, and so on. But my mission as a teacher is to help Americans just go one step beyond Orlando. There are people who all their lives will go to Orlando, and the only guidebooks that outsell my books in this country are guidebooks to Disneyland. I can't really compete with that. A lot of Americans, they just really are not interested in reality. They want La La Land, and Orlando is all about La La Land. After 4 or 5 trips to Orlando, you could go to Portugal. It would be a challenge. It would be stimulating. So I'm all about getting people over the pond. I got to bring home the magic. There's all sorts of magic. It's really fun in my work. I mean, there's natural wonders. When you're traveling, you can ride that lift up, and then you'll find yourself walking on a ridge. Imagine tight-roping on a ridge for 3 hours high in the Alps. On one side, you got lakes stretching all the way to Germany. On the other side, you got the most incredible alpine panorama anywhere, the Eiger, Monk, and Jungfrau. And ahead of you, you hear the long legato tones of an Alphorn, announcing that the helicopter-stocked mountain hut is open. It's just around the corner, and the coffee schnapps is on. That is good travel. And that gives you appreciation for nature. We got wonderful nature here too, but in Europe, when you travel, that nature is so accessible. Travel also gets you all excited about culture. A lot of ways, we Americans are sort of put off or sort of threatened by people who are sophisticated about their culture. I know after 25 years of leading groups around Europe, they're not saying they're better than us. They're just saying stinky cheese is worth spending a lot of money for. You should try it sometime. I grew up thinking cheese is orange in the shape of the bread. That's all it is, cheese sandwich. And they're evangelical about their cheese. I mean, the cheese shops are a festival of mold. I love it when I step into the cheese shop and the cheesemonger ushers me over to the goat cheese corner, picks up a moldy wad of cheese, takes a deep whiff. Oh, smell this cheese. It smells like the feet of angels. Wow, he's really into cheese. Now, you don't need to go home and be into cheese, but maybe you will be. And it is fun to know that a lot of people are. That just opens us up. History is something you gain an appreciation for when you travel. History is happening. It's real. A century from now, they'll look back on our generation, and it's a heady time. Wow. And we're right in the middle of it. As we travel, we should be comfortable with that thought. History is real, it's fun, it's meaningful, it's worth getting into. I got a history degree at the University of Washington accidentally. I remember waking up in the dorm one morning and it occurred to me, I've got 7 history classes under my belt, 3 more, and I'm a historian. Let's push on through. It's just fun. I couldn't believe they're giving me credit for this. It was storytelling because I had been over there and it meant something to me. And in our travels today, we can get excited about history. It's okay. It's an option. I'll never forget being in Berlin on the opening day of their brand new Reichstag building. Imagine that during in the war, it was bombed out. It was the last days of World War II were fought Russians against Germans on the rooftop of this building. And then throughout the Cold War, it was a bombed out black hulk, empty, on no man's land, the Berlin Wall with the government in Bonn. Suddenly the Cold War is over, Germany's reunited, the capital moves back to Berlin, they need a new parliament building. In good European style, they don't bulldoze the bombed out one and build a new one, they take the historic one and they renovate it, incorporating it into it a modern element. And now they have a parliament building with fingers into its past that looks into the future. I was there, like on the opening couple of days. It's free, it's designed for German citizens, but tourists are more than welcome to go up that ramp all the way to the very top. Powerful architectural symbolism. From the top of that dome, you literally look down over the shoulders of their legislators. Germans have been jerked around too much by their legislators in the last century. Now they're physically going to keep an eye on them. And those parliamentarians in Germany now, they're doing their work, and they know there are citizens looking at them. Beautiful, powerful symbolism of people's democracy there. I was on top of that dome on opening day, surrounded by teary-eyed Germans. Anytime you're surrounded by teary-eyed Germans, something exceptional is going on. And it occurred to me, wow, the opening of this building is the symbolic closing of the difficult chapter in the history of a great nation. No more division, no more communism, no more fascism, a united Germany, starting a new century with a new Capitol building looking into a promising future. I was caught up in it. It was exciting. And I looked around at the other American tourists up there, not one of them had a clue. And it saddened me. I thought, I'm living in a dumbed down society. And it occurred to me, that's a horrible thing. And I thought, you know, there's powerful forces in our society that would find it convenient if we're all just dumbed down. It's easier to make money off of people when they're dumbed down. It's easy to get people to vote for the wrong things when they're dumbed down. If you've got an agenda, an abusive agenda on your citizenry, you dumb them down. We are a corporate-driven society, and the dumber we are, the more money they make off us. And I promised to myself in my own little world as a travel writer that I was going to expect my travelers to be engaged. I was going to consider them smart, not rather hope that they're dumb. You can make more money in tourism with fun in the sun. Duty-free shopping, frequent flyer miles, what's the power of your sunscreen, and so on. Nothing's wrong with that in itself. But if that bullies you out of a meaningful travel experience, then you've lost something. We need to look around, and we need to just work on making sure that our workmates and our customers and our neighbors are smarted up, because the stakes are high. The challenges confronting us are complex. And Europe has paid a serious price when they try to dumb down their electorate. And now I notice Europe is really working to make their electorate smart and a little more savvy. One great thing about travel is it gets you out of your comfort zone socially. It has you hanging out with people you wouldn't normally hang out with. It's human nature for us to hang out with people who look like us, who celebrate like us, who worship like us, and so on. I mean, if I look around in this room, we're all pretty close to the same, which is normal, it's okay, that's kind of human nature. But once in a while, I think it's really constructive to find yourself in a situation where people stare at you because you're the odd one. We are inclined to think we're the norm, and we're not. People who sit on a toilet to go to the bathroom are the odd ones on this planet. They really are. I've been on airplanes where there's a stick figure decal over the toilet explaining to people, don't stand on the rim and squat over this thing. You actually sit on it, you see. We need to remember that we think we're the norm, but we may not be, and that's an exciting thing. Put yourself in a situation where people are going to stare at you. It doesn't have to be an earth-shaking situation, it's just fun. I was in Italy recently, and this little kid was staring at me. It was kind of rude. Finally, his dad said, "Excuse my son, he stares at Americans." I said, "Well, what's with that?" And he said, "Well, last week we were having our McDonald's hamburger, and my son, noticing the fluffy white bun, said, 'Dad, why do Americans have such soft bread?' And the dad said, 'Son, it's because Americans have no teeth.'" Now, I don't think the dad meant anything by that. Dads just say silly things to their kids to entertain themselves when they're out with the kid, right? But the kid was confused, and now he looks at tourists' teeth to see if they're there, and I showed him my teeth to overcome that little bit of misunderstanding between peoples. It is so powerful when you travel that you are able to overcome silly misunderstandings between people. I remember back in the Cold War, I was hanging out with my friends in Bulgaria, and we'd sit down and they'd ask me these very earnest questions because they were just confused. I seemed so happy, but I was supposed to be so miserable. And they said, "Okay, in capitalism, if everything is private property, how can you go anywhere without trespassing?" They were really struggling with that. You know, I'd never thought of it, but they had that misunderstanding because of their propaganda. When we travel, it makes it tougher for their propaganda to misrepresent us, and it makes it tougher for our propaganda to demonize them. It's a beautiful thing. It's an empowering thing. It's really important. One of my favorite places to travel in Europe is Ireland. And I think in part it's because in Ireland, I enjoy the sensation of understanding a foreign language. I really don't know what it's like, but in Ireland, everybody talks like they're speaking a foreign language and I can understand it, and they love to talk. They'll talk and talk and talk. They've got this art of conversation, the famous gift of gab. The place to enjoy that the most is on the west coast of Ireland, the far west of Ireland, where they stand on the bluff and they gaze out at the Atlantic and they say, ah, the next parish over is Boston. These are Gaeltachts. A Gaeltacht is a national park for the traditional culture, where the government has decided to fund, to subsidize the survival of the existing old world culture. Small family farms. They actually help them survive. It makes no sense here, I know that. But over there, they like for the younger generation in the big city to be able to go on a field trip and find out from where they came. The Gaeltachts, where people still speak Gaelic. You walk up to these guys, they're talking to each other in Gaelic. They turn to you, speak English, you didn't even know it. And then you walk away and they step back into their Gaelic. And when you talk to these guys, forget about your itinerary. This is why you're in Ireland. You get, caught up in a fun conversation. After a little while, I asked the guy on the left, I asked him, were you born here? He thought about it and he said, no, it was about 5 miles down the road. Later on, I asked him, have you lived here all your life? He said, not yet. I just love that. I just love talking to the Irish, and you get that in a Gaeltacht, a national park for the survival of the traditional culture. Europe, the big news in Europe these days is the unification of Europe. In our generation, Europe has basically become one big economic free trade zone. Now, it goes back to the late 1940s. Can you imagine leaders and philosophers and statesmen getting together in the rubble of a bombed-out continent and just saying, this is insanity. Twice in our lifetime, we've bombed ourselves into rubble. We got to do something really out of the box here, or what's going to happen again for our children. We need to knit our economies together. We need to interweave the economies of Germany and France, so a big war like this is inconceivable in the future, and they set about to do that. It's tough to talk proud sovereign nations, especially with the history they've got, into giving up sovereignty for unity. And unity is nothing without the participants giving up real sovereignty. So that's been an awkward and stuttering evolution for 60 years. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Every time there's a step back here in the United States, people just get all thinking, Europe's falling apart. What did I tell you? It's a basket case. But it is here to stay, and you can laugh about their political correctness, you can laugh about their cumbersome bureaucracy and their extra regulations, but I'll tell you, Europe will never again have a big war, and that alone makes the European Union a huge success. Apart from that, Europe knows that it has to create one big free trade zone to compete with the emerging economies on this planet, India and China, and of course the United States. And Europe has now done that. When you go to Europe, you find it is a mighty economic power. 400 million people producing $15 trillion a year worth of stuff. To put it in perspective, here in the United States, we're 300 million people producing roughly the same $15 trillion worth of stuff a year. Now, a lot of Americans are quick to put down Europe because of its socialism, its social sensibilities, its idealism. And they'll say, look at these Europeans. It takes them 400 million people to produce what we produce with just 300 million people. We make more than they do. Well, that's not the whole sentence. If it's an honest analysis, they'll tell you, yeah, we make more per person, but they choose to work 20% fewer hours and willingly produce 20% less stuff, so they have more time with their families. It's called family values in Europe. Here, it's called subversive. You can't do that. So it's not a right or a wrong thing. It really is not. It's just a societal choice. Here in the United States, we choose to have the shortest vacations in the rich world, and we choose to work ourselves into early graves. We neglect a lot of things in order to have that hard-hitting economy. But by any honest measurement, Europeans produce as much per hour as we do, and they just have a different system. I'll tell you, as a businessman, I'm really thankful to be working here in the United States. I would be frustrated and demoralized as a guerrilla entrepreneur kind of capitalist in Europe. I employ 100 people here. I have a lot of fun. I can turn on a dime. We produce great stuff. I pay my staff well, and I can make good money. I couldn't do that in Europe. I really am thankful for that here. On the other hand, we can learn a lot from Europe with their more interesting and compassionate social sensibilities. Europe works hard, and Europe plays hard. And that's what's annoying to a lot of Americans, I think, is they just play more than we do. We have a work ethic. Well, I mean, I always thought a work ethic means you work hard, but no, that is our work ethic. They have a work ethic also, and it's called work and play in balance. I'm in Amsterdam here. It's a Wednesday afternoon, and I see this party boat filled with people having a blast. These are not students. These are grown adults. These are these are adults, and it's Wednesday. I'm thinking, am I missing something? Is there a festival that I should know about for my guidebook research? I ask them, what's going on? And they say, it's Wednesday afternoon. We cut out of work early, we rent the boat, and we have a party. Do you want to get in? And that is just so European. It's amazing. I've got a friend here who's running a little movement in the United States called Take Back Your Time. And his national holiday, reminding Americans we do have the shortest vacations in the rich world, and we're a little bit out of balance, and what's it all about, and what matters anyways, when it's all said and done. His national holiday is October 23, because by his estimate, if you were a European working as long hours as we do here in the States, October 23rd would be the last day that year you got to go to work. That's annoying, I think. But that's just an interesting, thought-provoking deal. Now, when you go to Europe, you're going to find a lot of struggles economically, just like we've got our struggles economically here. And I want to remind you, when we do have these different economic crises, 90% of humanity wishes they had our crisis. We're filthy rich, right? So, I mean, you've got your problems, I got my problems, America's got its problems, Europe has its problems, but half of humanity is trying to live on $2 a day. When the cost of rice goes up 30%, and 90% of your family budget is going to rice, that's a crisis. So all of our crises are should be kept in perspective, I would say. Now, when you think about Europe's problems, and you're going to see a lot of demonstrations on the street in Europe, a lot of them do relate to Europe's lavish and generous entitlements. Europe has entitlements that make ours look really stingy. And they were a great idea when they brought them in. They were sustainable, they were compassionate, they were smart. The result of those great entitlements in Europe was a wealthier, better educated society. Anytime a society becomes wealthier and better educated, two things happen. They have less children and they live longer. Now, those entitlements were possible as long as it was a young society with a lot of people working and a few people living past retirement. They had a demographic makeup that was a pyramid. A lot of people on the bottom, a few people on the top, supported by all those entitlements. As things flip-flop and people live longer and have fewer kids, Europe becomes a geriatric continent with fewer workers, more people living to retirement, and after that they just live way too long. What do? Well, the arithmetic's not there, is it, to sustain those entitlements that assumed a lot of young people working and a few people on the top enjoying. So the sorry lot in life for politicians in Europe these days is to stand in front of their workers and say, sorry, we got to change the rules on you. Your parents got it. You worked your whole career with this promise. Your friend got it who retired 10 years ago, but you got to work 5 more years. That's enough to make decent people go downtown, demonstrate, and burn a Starbucks. And that's what's happening. People get out and march. It's healthy. That's how Europeans vent. You'll see 1 million people on the streets in Europe complaining about this or that workers' concern. And I think that's nothing to be afraid of. You can steer clear of it, or you can join it depending on your taste in travel thrills. But it's nothing different than here in the United States, except that they do a lot of marching, and for Americans, that's just way too much exercise. We got the same frustrations, but what we do to vent is we go home and we find a TV network that affirms our frustrations, and then we just shake our fists. I really believe what you see in that regard here in the United States with the angriness on TV is similar to the marches you see in Europe. And it's just dealing with realities. For the rest of our lives, Europe is going to be trying to rejigger that system because it's a geriatric continent and they can't have it the way it used to be. They wanted to let Turkey into the EU. Europeans don't like Turkey. They just needed 70 million society with the youngest society around so they can inject a lot of young labor into their geriatric workforce. business leaders were fans of Turkey joining the EU. Other people were not. So it's a fun, rough and tumble sort of situation. A generation ago, the Cold War ended, and overnight we have 100 million new capitalists. Wow. That was an exciting time, wasn't it? And over that last generation, it was a festival of pent-up entrepreneurial spirit in what we call Eastern Europe. I want to remind you, we call it Eastern Europe because we are thinking in terms of the Iron Curtain, right? It's a very nice way to cut Europe in half. You got the free West and the communist East, Eastern Europe. Historically, that's not Eastern Europe, that's Central Europe, Habsburg Europe. And Eastern Europe would be the Ukraine and Russia. People there consider themselves Central Europeans. I have to call it Eastern Europe on my guidebook, but I apologize for it right away because my friends there don't like that title. But that's what resonates with the American market, so I have to call it that. When you go to Eastern Europe today, these people are in Poland, you feel the energy and the confidence and the optimism. It's a beautiful time to be in Eastern Europe, and all over the place. You'll find the infrastructure given them as their membership in the EU would help fund it, and you'll find people really living life very well and appreciating the freedom to have their capitalistic free economies. Also, you'll find a very interesting connection with the world's problems when you're in Eastern Europe, because Eastern Europe has lived through so much. I was just in Poland recently, and after Russia did their bad deed in the Ukraine, the Poles are really up in arms with that because they know it could happen to them. And they had it happen to them in living memory of a lot of people. And so they stand up for the Ukraine, and they make problems, and Russia gets mad at Poland, and Russia knows that Poland grows a lot of apples, and Russia says, we're not going to buy your apples anymore. That's supposed to devastate the Polish economy. And now all the Poles that I met were up in arms, and they were not going to let Russia intimidate them by not buying their apples, and everywhere I looked, there were apples. Every hotel room had a basket of free apples. You had apples at the tourist information office, apples at the train station. This guy was dressed up on the main square in Brussels or in Warsaw, and he is singing some song and basically saying, piss off Putin, eat an apple. When you travel, you get caught up in these local, exciting sort of events and passions that you'd be oblivious to here, and I think that's a beautiful part of your travels. And you gain a respect for what people have lived through and what they're struggling with today. It's different than us, and it's really, it shines a whole new light on your travels. I find the diversity in Europe to be a charming thing about Europe. And my fear, you would think, is as Europe unites, it would become all the same. There's no borders, everything is the same currency, you got a Starbucks on every corner, there's that uniformity that we find here in the United States. But what's interesting, counterintuitively, the more Europe unites, the more vivid the regional differences. Let me explain why. In Europe, there are three loyalties. There's regions, there's nations, and there's Europe. Every city hall in Europe has three flags in front of it. Here in Edinburgh, you'll see it. You got the region, Scotland, the nation, Britain, and Europe. If you got a friend in Munich, you could say, where are you from? He might say, I'm Bavarian. He might say, I'm German, or he might say, I'm a European. Got a friend in Barcelona? He might be Catalonian, he might be Spanish, or he might be European. It's very interesting to remember that the headlines in our lifetimes in Europe have pretty much been regions challenging nations. As Europe is uniting in Brussels with the EU, the nations are fading away politically. They're not going to be players in the future, and the regions are now dealing with Brussels instead of their national capital. And Brussels is funding the regions. It's very interesting. Historically, the Basque people have threatened Madrid. The Celtic people in Brittany have threatened Paris, and the Irish and the Scottish people have threatened London. Just recently, London gave Scotland the opportunity to vote for its independence. London gave Edinburgh its own parliament a few years ago. First time since 1707, there's a parliament in Scotland for the Scottish people. London's not that threatened. Remember, you can secede from France or you can secede from Spain, but you can't secede from Europe. And Europe is very tuned in to the regions. Nowadays, regions are waving their flag with more vigor. The little languages are more widely spoken today than a generation ago. That's really counterintuitive. Everything is big and everything is aggressive, and the little forces are being plowed under with globalization. But when it comes to languages of ethnic groups, because of Brussels and the EU, more people are speaking the small languages today. After Mass on Sunday in Barcelona, you go to the cathedral and people are dancing their sacred sardana dance out in front of the cathedral. You'd get tossed in jail a little while ago to do that in Barcelona. The people are teaching their kids, raising their kids speaking Catalan, and they're learning Spanish as a second language in school, in Spain. If you look at an ATM machine in Barcelona, the top 4 buttons are Spanish languages, 4 languages spoken in Spain. You're in Barcelona, so the top button on the left would be Catalan. Catalan, for the people of Catalan. Across from that, you've got Espanol, for most Spanish people. Below Catalan, you've got Gallego, for the Celtic people of northwestern Spain, Galicia. And across from that, you've got Euskara, which is the language of the Basque people. Below that, you've got a button for German-speaking people, French-speaking people, English-speaking people, and 1 button for everybody else. Now, if you were to go to an ATM machine in Basque country, you would find the same 4 buttons on the top, wouldn't you? You'd have Basque first and Catalan fourth, but you'd have the same 4 buttons. And the Basque people would expect to have Catalans, and the Catalans would expect to be on it because they've got a solidarity together. They are fellow victims of the tyranny of the majority. They are fellow nations without states, you see. And I think it's very exciting to gain an empathy for those struggles and what it must take to survive in a rough and tumble world today if you're a little language. Remember, Brussels is funding the ethnic regions, not the political entities created after wars. That's what our lines are in Europe today, after World War I or whatever, you see. I've got a friend named Armin Walsh. He's the Indiana Jones of Tyrolean archaeologists. And Armin has endless energy and creative ideas, and he needs money. He likes to renovate castles in the Tyrol, and in order to do that, he needs money. He doesn't go to Vienna. He goes to Brussels. He doesn't say in Brussels that I've got a great idea for Austria, because he'd go home without any money. He says, I've got a great idea for the Tyrol, and he gets money to do his renovation. Brussels is funding the Tyrol because the Tyrol is an ethnic region that ignores modern political boundaries. Part of it is in Austria, part of it is in Italy, and Brussels likes that. Remember, in Europe, you have net givers and net receivers. If you're a wealthy nation, you give more than you take out. If you're a poor nation, you take out more than you give in, and Europeans like that. It's a big family, and they're only as strong as their weakest link. The same philosophy as in the United States when we built our interstate system. Every state, regardless of their wealth, comparative wealth, and their ability to contribute with the taxes, got the same quality roads. At least that was the idea. Now when you go to Europe, you can go to the 4 poorest countries, historically, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, and Greece. And I remember when none of those countries had any freeways, and today they're laced with German quality freeways. This is a photograph of a new freeway in Ireland. And like most new freeways, it's got a European flag on the post, and it says this project has received 85% financial assistance from the European Union. In other words, France and Germany paid for this road. Now you Irish people gotta use it and work. Stop drinking so much Guinness. We're competing with the United States, you see. So there's that spirit in Europe that I think is quite exciting. All my life, I've crossed the Gulf of Corinth in Greece on a funky ferry. A few years ago, I came to the Gulf of Corinth, and I had a double take. The ferry was gone, and this incredible bridge was bridging the Gulf of Corinth. And I thought, this is not a Greek bridge. This is a German bridge, built with German money in Greece to get German trucks over that body of water filled with gummy bears to sell their product down in the Peloponnesian Peninsula. That's how it works. I asked my German friends, don't you guys get tired of bailing out Greece, tens of billions of euros? Yeah, it's a drag, but we've made a lot of money off of Greece over the years, and we intend to make money off of them in the future, and every once in a while we just got to bail them out. So it's kind of like that sort of spirit. They're all part of the family, and they got to prop them up. Europe has an awe-inspiring internal Marshall Plan, it seems like, where they are investing in their infrastructure, beyond what I can even imagine. I mean, we talk about potholes, and we try to do this and got decrepit that, but boy, in Europe, they just get it done. It's really quite breathtaking, and I love just to be part of it. I love to see it. It's part of the joy of going to Europe. The new train station in Berlin, the Hauptbahnhof, the mightiest train station in Europe, 1,000 and some trains coming and going every day, train lines on different levels, train lines coming in at right angles. It's just amazing. I was in Munich recently taking photographs of trains coming into the station, specifically taking pictures of what were cute little birds squished onto the windshield of those trains. Yeah, I know, it's terrible. And when I was looking at that little bird, I thought two things. First of all, I thought, boy, this is a dangerous continent if you're a slow bird. And then I thought, it's a surreal image. I don't know about where you live, but here in Seattle, you just can't imagine a bird squished to the windshield of a train. It's inconceivable. I can imagine a bird sitting on a folding chair with smoking a cigar and enjoying a drink on the rooftop, but not squished to the window. And that is so common in Europe now. They're like rockets on rails, those trains, and to ride them is really something. Remember, we have the 4th of July, and every other country has their own 4th of July. It seems so elementary, but when I was a kid, I had to get used to that fact. You don't have the 4th of July in Norway, you got May 17. Here in Switzerland, you got August 1st, and of course in France, it's 10 days after ours, Bastille Day, July 14. People are celebrating their heritage. And everybody doesn't have the American dream. I just thought it was common sense for people to have the American dream. No, these people have the Sri Lankan dream. Norwegians have the Norwegian dream. My Bulgarian friends have the Bulgarian dream. We think that everybody wants to come here. I mean, there are people fleeing horrible situations that want to come here, but people want to stay in their country if there's stability and an economy there, and they've got the local dream. And to me, that's a celebration. That doesn't diminish our dream at all. It's just important for us to understand that different people do have different dreams. And when you travel, you find a lot of pride. You find a lot of spine. I had beautiful times traveling across Asia, and a long time ago I was traveling across Afghanistan. And I had lunch in Kabul in the cafeteria where all the travelers go. I just sat down minding my own business, and suddenly there's a man sitting next to me. And he asked me, he said, "Can I join you?" I said, "You already have." And he said, "Are you an American?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I'm a professor here in Afghanistan, and I would like you to know that 1/3 of the people on this planet eat with spoons and forks like you do. 1/3 of the people eat with chopsticks, and 1/3 of the people eat with their fingers like I do, and we're all civilized just the same." I remember that's how he said it. We're all civilized just the same. And I thought, you got a chip on your shoulder about this, don't you? And then I thought about it later, and he was right. I thought less of him because he ate with his fingers. He could have used spoon and fork, but it was just right to use his fingers. For the rest of my trip through South Asia, I chose to go to fancy restaurants filled with professional local people, restaurants that had no spoons and no forks, but they had a ceremonial sink in the middle of the dining hall where people would wash up and use their fingers for what God intended them to be used for, to nourish themselves. It really felt holistic. It felt right. It became very natural. In fact, when I got home, I had to retrain myself. So the point is, different people do things different. And when you travel, you gain a respect that there are struggles and there is pride that is just beyond our comprehension. One of my favorite places to be a tour guide is in Turkey, because in Turkey, it's just a cultural scavenger hunt, Eastern Turkey especially. Doing a tour through Eastern Turkey, you don't have a list of famous sites. You're just out and about looking for interesting things. I remember we were in the shadow of Mount Ararat once, and we came upon a high school stadium filled with kids having some kind of rally. Stop the bus, go inside. 200 kids thrusting their fist up in the sky in unison, singing together, "We are a secular nation. We are a secular nation." I asked my guide, "What's going on? Don't they like God here?" And she said, "Oh no, we love God, but considering the rising tide of Islamic fundamentalism over the border just to our east, we're very concerned about the fragile and precious separation of mosque and state here in our country, given to us by Ataturk in the 1920s with our Constitution." Wow, it was a pep rally for secularism. I never thought about a pep rally for secularism in a Turkish high school. It just humbles me to think that that is the norm in a land that I thought was just a dusty, godforsaken bunch of farmers using, dung for firewood. I mean, it was just a rough and tumble corner of the world, quite poor. Later on, we stopped in a little village, and the mayor met us, and he took us into the woodcarver's shop. And this woodcarver was well known in the region. I think we were the first American group that ever been there. And we gathered around his table, and everybody in that region wanted one of his prayer niches. This guy was such a great carver. And we gathered around, he was all puffed up, showing off his work, and suddenly he stopped, he held his chisel high into the sky, and he declared, "A man and his chisel, the greatest factory on earth." And I looked at that guy and I thought, he does not need me to recommend that he go to night school and become computer literate. You know, he was fulfilled. He was doing what his dad did. He had great respect. Later on, I asked him if I could buy some of his art and take it home. And he said, "Oh no, for a man my age, to know that some of my art would go back to the United States and be appreciated, that's payment enough. Here, take this and remember our village." I just love that stuff. I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff. And that's real. And that's the kind of connection you don't get unless you really get out and travel. You know, we treasure our patriots and our heroes, our Nathan Hales, Ethan Allens, Patrick Henrys, and so on, and we're raised to respect them as we should be. But one thing I've learned is there are Nathan Hales and Patrick Henrys and Ethan Allens outside of our border. In fact, lots of countries have heroic people who really are important to their culture. And in my travels, I find it's really fun and really rewarding to try to get my brain around other people's Nathan Hales. An obvious one would be Archbishop Oscar Romero in Central America. Another one would be Nelson Mandela, for instance. Lots of inspirational people that we can connect with. I remember once I was due for a vacation. My family and I were going to go down to Mazatlan. I was exhausted. I really wanted a vacation. I was fantasizing about a pristine stretch of tropical beach, swept free of local riffraff, just me and my wealthy white friends. Plastic strap around our wrist. We didn't have to dirty our fingers with the local coins, just all the margaritas we wanted. It was going to be great. And then my other friends invited me to go to El Salvador because it was the 25th anniversary of the assassination of Archbishop Oscar Romero. I told my family, I'm going to be no fun on the beach. I got to go to San Salvador. It's not more expensive. It's not more dangerous. It's less comfortable. Life-changing. Literally life-changing. Compare that to an experience at Mazatlan on the beach. Anybody could do it. The choice is yours. Mazatlan or Managua. What's the choice going to be? You can do that if you're curious. It's right there. It's right there. And it just carbonates your whole existence. It's tough. I mean, day 2, I was in a sweaty bunk bed covered with bug bites, eating rice and beans one day, beans and rice the next. But marching with people who really had a passion for their culture. And they just went through a civil war. It was a tough time. Archbishop Oscar Romero sided with the landless people. Of course, the whole struggle back then, you remember the Sandinistas and the Contras and all that, it was framed as communist against capitalists, and I bought the whole thing. And then went down there and I just got the other narrative. It wasn't simply communist against capitalist, it was landless peasants against 5 families that owned nearly all the arable land in the country. It was cash cropping, where there's no more rice and beans grown locally to be consumed by local peasants. If you own land and you're a wealthy elite, you don't want to sell rice and beans to your peasants. You want to export fancy food to a rich country to the north. And that's what happens. Consequently, your landless peasantry works on the plantation. There's nothing grown locally for them to eat, so they buy tinned food from the United States with their plantation wages. That's not propaganda. That's not communist, ideology. It's just simple economics. That's what cash cropping's all about. It's a desperate situation for those landless people, and that's the receiving end of aggressive capitalism. In the Bible, it says every 50 years, you're supposed to redivide the land and forgive the debts. It's called the Jubilee year. I mean, it's right there in the Bible. Rich Christians know God must have been kidding. I mean, come on. But it's right there. And people south of the border, they embrace that kind of stuff. They take that seriously. And if you look at it historically, every 50 years, every time the Jubilee year is ignored, there's been a big crush putting down peasant uprisings in Central America. 1830s, 1880s, 1930s, 1980s. It's just the nature of aggressive capitalism. In a true free market society, if my cat has more buying power than your child, my cat gets the tuna. End of story, you see. And that's kind of what it's like. So you have these uprisings. Archbishop Oscar Romero said, I'm going to stand with the landless peasants. He said, I'll probably be shot down, but I'm going to walk the talk. And He was shot, he was killed. And he rose again in his peasants, I tell you. Marching through the street with tens of thousands of Salvadorans on the anniversary of his assassination. You could feel the presence of Archbishop Oscar Romero there 25 years later. It's really quite something. On that march, we came upon, in the capital city, this monument. And when I looked at that monument, I thought, now wait a minute. This is our monument. This is the Vietnam Memorial. My Salvadoran said, well, it's the same design, and we did take that from you, but this is our monument. Those names are our casualties. 50,000 names on that memorial, all of them killed by the United States. Now, maybe they were communists and we had to kill them. That's a whole different story, and I just don't want to get into that. But this is baggage. This is a little country of 5 million people or something that lost as many people as we lost in the Vietnam War. That's baggage. And in my travels, I've learned that it's really important to try to empathize with other people's baggage. Think of what the Vietnam did to us, how it scarred us when we lost 60,000 people out of 200 million or something. And they lost that many people out of 5 million. That's big time. I went to Iran because I wanted to know what their baggage was. I wanted to know how people could vote for a guy like Ahmadinejad. My friends asked me, why are you going to Iran? And I explained that, and I also said, you know, and I think it's good character to know people before you bomb them. Awkward. I'm not a pacifist. Sometimes you got to use your military and kill people. I'm fine with that, really. But every bomb that drops and every bullet that flies has my name on it, and I take personal responsibility for it as much as I can. And I think honest people should. So I wanted to go there because I know our system tries to dehumanize people before we bomb them, and I really wanted to know what was going on. And I've got this gig with public television, so I could do a little TV show and share it with people, so it's perfect. I went over there. I was afraid. I really was afraid. Boy, oh boy. I'm so glad I went in with the big camera. We almost left our little camera in Athens, our big camera in Athens, and took our little camera, our little sneak camera in. I was thinking, on the streets of Tehran, they'd be throwing stones at us. And I got there, and I've never experienced such friendliness on the streets of any city I've ever worked in Tehran, as an American journalist. It's a big city, 12 million or something like that, lots of traffic jams, and huge, hateful banners, 8-story tall graffiti, American flag made out of skulls for stars and dropping bombs for stripes that says down with the USA. And there I am, walking underneath that. Awkward. But then I realized, you know, that banner is older than any of the people on the street. And I thought, I want to meet the people. I want to find out what's their baggage. I was caught in a traffic jam. There's lots of traffic jams in Tehran. It was just silent. We're out in the traffic jam. Suddenly the man in the next car does this to my driver, roll down your window. He hands over a bouquet of flowers and he says, give this to the foreigner in your back seat and apologize for our traffic. I thought, that doesn't I don't know about where you come from, but where I live, that doesn't happen. That just doesn't happen. Later on, we were in another traffic jam. It was just silent, and suddenly my driver just blurted out, he said, death to traffic. Death to traffic? I thought it was death to Israel or death to America. And he said, no, right now, it's death to traffic. And I said, well, what's with that? And he said, well, here in Iran, when something is out of our control and frustrating us, we say death to that. And I thought, no, you know, this is really interesting. I'd never given it much thought. I just assumed they meant that. But then I thought, no, this guy doesn't speak English that well. He's translating directly, damn the traffic, isn't he? Damn the traffic. Damn election fraud. Damn the rain. Damn Obama. Damn Ahmadinejad. I don't know about you, but once in a while I've thought, damn those teenagers. Do I really want them to die and burn in hell for an eternity? No, not yet. It's just after midnight. Turn down the music. Damn those teenagers. So we owe it to ourselves to be a little more sophisticated than boiling it all down to an angry bumper sticker and taking something out of context. I mean, it's kind of embarrassing. What we know about Iran as a society, we learned from Ted Koppel. And that was a media circus. They bust in those people, gave them free lunch to shake their fist at the camera and say death to America. And we all just bought it. How naive. So I don't want to apologize for their regime, but I do want to understand why people would vote them and what makes them tick. And when you go to Iran, you find a fascinating culture, well worth checking out. If you'd like to learn more about it, we produced this 1-hour special about Iran. It aired all over the United States. It'll air again on public television now and then, but if you want to see it anytime, you can just go to ricksteves.com, go to the TV section, click on Iran, and you can watch the 1-hour show. But it was one of the most beautiful travel experiences of my life. I'm so thankful I went there. I'm so thankful. I learned that they've got baggage. We've got baggage, and I've been really into our baggage lately. 9/11, 15 years ago, we lost 2,800 people. We still have a flag at half-mast here in Edmonds. You know, this is a horrible thing for our society. I don't want to belittle that at all. It was a terrible thing. It was a tragic thing. But I want to keep it in perspective, and I want to remember that other societies have had their own 9/11s. Frankly, much worse than ours. Much worse than ours. Iran's baggage is the Iran-Iraq War. 20 years ago or so, they lost hundreds of thousands of people on their Western Front when they were invaded by Iran, led by Saddam Hussein, funded by the United States of America. Maybe you don't believe that. That's fine. Maybe I don't know if I do or not. It just doesn't really matter. They believe it, and that's their baggage. And today, every town in Iran has a vast martyrs' cemetery. And filming in those martyrs' cemeteries, they were as alive today as they were 20 years ago with people mourning. It is so vivid and painful for them, their baggage. And if you go to that cemetery and you see a woman weeping on the tomb of her husband, as she's done every Friday for 20 years, you recognize that's some pretty serious baggage. And you see women weeping on the tomb of their loved ones. This is so real. It's so important that we check this out. And when you travel, you get this firsthand information. You humanize the enemy. And I just think that is so vital these days when you consider the appetite militaries have for action and the amount of money they can make when people send people to war and all the propaganda and all this kind of ugly stuff. I was on the streets on my last day of shooting, and a well-dressed professional woman came up to me and she said, "Are you an American journalist?" And I said, "Yes." She did one of these things on my chest. She said, "I want you to go home and tell the truth. We're united, we're strong, and we just don't want our little girls to be raised like Britney Spears." Now I'm getting it. These are the people that were so afraid that they voted for Ahmadinejad. Who puts a guy like Ahmadinejad in power? The same as that slice of the electorate's counterpart here. Less educated, small town fundamentalists. Beautiful people, filled with love and riddled with fear. It's powerful when you think about it. Ahmadinejad wins by 51% when he ran, just like our politicians. And you gotta stir up your base. And you do that by saying wacky things to get these people all excited. And what they don't wanna do, they don't care much about oil. What they care about is incursions from the West that are gonna hijack their kids and turn them into boy toys, crass materialists, and drug addicts. That's what scares that mom. And when you look at Miley Cyrus today, we can laugh it off. But if you're in Iran and you hear people talking lightly about regime change, and you grew up with the Shah on your throne for a whole generation, when you elected a charismatic local prime minister who wanted to control your oil for your people, and that was not acceptable, so in 1953, Britain and America got rid of him and put on a puppet named the Shah so we could have access to their oil. The downside of that, if you were that lady in the small town, that fundamentalist, less educated mother who was so concerned about her child's upbringing, was that you had a leader who was bragging in Tehran that the miniskirts are shorter in Tehran than they are in Paris, disrespecting women and polluting all of their values. That's really what they're afraid of, I think. And maybe we got to say, just lighten up. But that doesn't work. We have to deal with the reality, and that's their baggage. What a beautiful thing to go to Iran and just to meet the people. Not to excuse their government, but to humanize that society of 70 million people. I'll never forget going to a big palace, and there's all sorts of school groups there on school break, on field trips. And I was going to take a photograph of this group of schoolgirls, and I can hear their teacher barking at them right now. I didn't understand the Farsi, but I know what she was saying. She was saying, girls, this Western gentleman's going to take your photograph, and you look like a bunch of floozies. Cover your hair, for goodness sakes. So they all giggle, they cover their hair, and now we're ready for the photograph. So they're hung up about women looking respectful in public. Maybe they take it farther than what we're comfortable with, but when they look at our society, do you know what they understand? They think we're a society that takes a well-built woman, dresses her really tight and skimpy, puts her on a revolving pedestal at a car show in order to sell hot rods, which is actually the truth. And again, we would say lighten up, and they would say that's disrespectful to women. I just think it's fun to learn about that stuff. And you can learn a whole boatload of that stuff when you go to a place like Iran. I was recently also in the Holy Land, sort of as a follow-up to our Iran show, and I had a wonderful experience traveling in Israel and in Palestine. Now, when we look at this map, we got to remember the Holy Land is the area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean coast. 12 million people live in the Holy Land, which is this disputed area that's always in our news. 8 million of those 12 million are in Israel. 4 million are in Palestine. 6 million, half of the people are Jewish, and 6 million, half of the people are Muslim. 2% are Christian. So there's 2 million Muslim Arab Israelis. Okay? Palestine is split between Gaza and the West Bank. Most of the people and most of the land is the West Bank. Gaza I stayed away from. It's a complicated issue. It's a much more difficult situation than the West Bank. It's run by Hamas, and it tends to be more violent and more poor and more desperate. I just don't want to get involved in that because I don't know enough about it. I wanted to go to Palestine Light, the West Bank, run by the Palestinian Authority, and I believe, as a society, they have realized that they're going to coexist with Israel, and violence is going to get them nowhere, okay? There's going to be crimes and little problems here and there, but as a society, I think they realize they're never going to get anywhere with violence. Now, if you look at the Holy Land, and you look at the border between Israel and the West Bank, that is a wall that's been built in the last couple of decades in the interest of security from terrorist incursions. But what it also does, it keeps the societies apart. And to me, that's a very sad, unintended consequence of that wall. Things are very close together. You can see Bethlehem on that map is in the West Bank, and Jerusalem is in Israel. If you wanted to, and you had a bicycle, you could bike from where people believe Jesus was born in Bethlehem to where he was crucified in Jerusalem in half an hour. But people in Bethlehem can't go to Jerusalem, and people in Jerusalem generally can't go to Bethlehem because of that wall. Tourists can walk right across it, like going from San Diego to Tijuana, basically. And it's about the same economic situation, a tenfold different in per capita income. $30,000 per person income in Israel, $3,000 on the other side in Palestine. Just to the south of Bethlehem in West Bank is Hebron. And Hebron is often in the news. It's been in the news lately because that's a very hot spot, because there you have the tomb of Abraham. Abraham is the common ancestor of both the Israelis and the Palestinians, all right? And this is really a very interesting thing, very important person to both communities. And right now, when you go to the tomb of Abraham, there's bulletproof glass halfway on it. On one side is a synagogue, on the other side is a mosque, and people are trying to worship at the same place without killing each other. Very powerful. I'm excited about Israel's success. Now, for the first time, there are more Jews in Israel than Jews killed by Hitler, over 6 million. Israel is, almost over 60 years old, and I was there on their 4th of July, their national holiday, and it was fun. All the parks were filled with barbecues. Everybody's in a great mood. But 1 mile away, there's this big ugly wall, or a fence, whatever you want to call it. And on the other side of that fence, every time there's a national holiday in Israel, there's another festival in Palestine. It's called the Day of Catastrophe. And this was the day they lost their big war. And that's poignant to me. And when you travel there, you get to talk to people on both sides as well. That's what I was really impressed by. And anybody, I believe, that has the great fortune to go to Israel should get the whole experience by crossing that wall and go to Palestine. It's easy to do. You don't need a visa or anything like that. It feels safe to me. Stay in a nice hotel. There's plenty of ways you can do that. There's good guidebooks, and there's wonderful local guides that you can hire. A trip to Israel is not complete unless you get to talk to some Palestinians on the other side of that wall. I found easy access everywhere. How many people know what it's like to be in a settlement in the West Bank, a Jewish settlement in the West Bank? I didn't know if we could even go in there. We walked into 5 or 6 settlements, and we're more than welcome. I got to talk to families and see little Israeli kids with their guns, plastic guns, shooting imaginary terrorists and Palestinians. That's kind of crummy. Then I went into the refugee camps in Palestine, and I saw hardscrabble little kids who were Palestinians with their plastic guns shooting imaginary Jews. I thought, that's crummy also. Why do they have to do this? And then I remember when I was a kid, what did my parents give me? Guns. What for? To shoot commies, Japanese, Germans, shoot their enemies, shoot Indians. Parents give their kids guns so they can have their baggage and shoot their enemies. And the terrible thing about that wall is kids on both sides are saddled with their parents' baggage and their parents' narrative, and they can't talk to each other. I find that a shame. As a traveler, we get to talk to people on both sides. I met beautiful people in Israel and beautiful people in Palestine. In fact, I had great guides on both sides. It's tough to get them together. That's the challenge. It's like, by design, they can't talk to each other. It was really tough, as a matter of fact, even to find a place where my Israeli guide could park his car next to my Palestinian guide so I could change over. There's one restaurant where both green-plated and yellow-plated cars could park side by side, and there I let Abi meet Kamal, and my Jewish friend met my Palestinian friend. They traded cards, and I jumped from one car to the next. The sad thing is, after 2 weeks in Holy Land, I knew more about the West Bank than that professional Israeli guide, and I knew more about Israel than that professional Palestinian guide. It's very poignant. If you get a chance to see that show on public television, look for the Rick Steves special on the Holy Land. You can also watch it anytime on my website at ricksteves.com. But to go into the West Bank and to humanize that difficult situation, to go to the university and hang out with the students there, it really is a beautiful opportunity. I want to remind you that whenever I travel anywhere, I take all my friends along on Facebook. I've got over 300,000 people that travel with me. I'm always enjoying taking people behind the scenes, and all of this is so fun to share. If you'd like to be my travel partner, please check out Rick Steves on Facebook and follow me there. And I do want to remind you, we've got lots of stuff going on at Europe Through the Back Door. Our tour program is just thriving. We took 20,000 people this year on 800 different tours. About half of those people were return customers, one of my favorite statistics. I just am so proud of our tour program and all the other information that we're putting together with my 100 workmates at Rick Steves Europe. You can learn all about that at ricksteves.com. Now, when we travel, I'm going to go back to Europe just for a few minutes here. We find Europeans are really into liberty just like we are. In fact, they've got a Statue of Liberty with double the liberty. Happens to be in the hometown of Salvador Dali, Cadaqués in Spain. Of course, the great surrealist would have lots of liberty in his mind. All over Europe, you see these charming examples of local people celebrating their culture. In fact, a little town in Italy has a festival every summer where the older kids teach the younger kids how to make a good ravioli. That's just a beautiful thing, worked into the society so those traditions pass from generation to generation. A great little town in Burgundy in the wine region in France pools its resources at the Chamber of Commerce to make these beautiful orbs where the visitor can go from one orb to the next and appreciate the fine difference in the bouquet of the wine that they make right there in that valley. Apparently in that part of Burgundy, a good nose is a life skill worth investing in, and they do that at the Chamber of Commerce. In Europe, in so much of Europe, people happily pay too much for their loaf of bread in order to buy it from the person who baked it. Here in the United States, a lot of times we aspire to have a big freezer in the garage, so we only have to go shopping every other week. It's much more efficient, save a lot of money that way. In Europe, they intentionally have a little refrigerator under their sink, so every morning they have to go to the market and spend extra money to meet with the people who sell them their produce. That's just family values in Europe. I think Europeans know that they can consume in a way that helps shape their future, and they are encouraging to do that. Europeans certainly appreciate their fine wine, and Europeans know where to fill it up really cheap, too. I love to go to these filling stations for wine, where you find people with a car full of empty jugs, filling it up for table wine for the coming season. The cheapest liquid you can buy in much of Europe is table wine. In the United States, we have this notion of legislating morality, and my European friends tell me it doesn't work very well. Everybody in this room has a morality. If you were able to legislate your morality over everybody else's, it just wouldn't be quite right. My European friends tell me a society has to make a choice: tolerate alternative lifestyles or build more prisons. And then you can bet they follow that up with the annoying statistic that we Americans lock up 10 times as many people per capita as they do in Europe. Either we are inherently a more criminal people or we've got some goofy laws. I think, thank goodness, we're coming around to our common sense and realizing we've got some pretty goofy laws. There's a huge momentum in our society right now to deal with mass incarceration. Of course, we're comfortable people who can afford to travel and we want to have safety on the streets, and I sure appreciate that here. But you get to a point where the more people you lock up, counterintuitively, the less safe you are. And I believe we're there. It's a whole another lecture. But consider mass incarceration. Consider the fact that in America we have prisons for profit. Can you imagine a state allowing prisons for profit? They just spent $400 million. Stockholders have to fill that prison up or they're going to be seeing a loss on their investment. You bet they're going to keep people locked up and throw away the key. It's good for business. To have prisons for profit in a society that already has too many people locked up when it's already a racist kind of thing is just amazing that we put up with that. When you go to Europe, you find they don't have that just say no morality. They've got a pragmatic harm reduction approach to things rather than criminalize it and moralize it, you see. And I find that very challenging. Nobody would say prostitution's a good thing. But most people know there's going to be prostitution regardless of how strict the laws are and the penalties are against it. While in the United States we might criminalize it and have more disease and more crime and more violence and more money involved, in Europe they decide to have that pragmatic harm reduction approach to prostitution without saying it's good or bad. It's just going to happen. Let's have a law that takes the violence out of it and everything. They make it a taxed and regulated business. You don't get license unless you've been checked by a doctor so you're not passing diseases. Women run their little offices in a unionized kind of way and so on. And the whole idea is when you push your emergency button when you have a dangerous client, you're not rescued by a pimp, but you're rescued by a policeman. It doesn't always work that nice, but that's the notion. And in Europe, they have a lot of legal brothels, and they seem to appreciate that sort of approach to it. And it certainly does make for an interesting sightseeing attraction. Don't be surprised when you see those brothels in Europe. Many times when I'm in Europe, I go down to the toilet in a nice restaurant and I find blue lights. It blindsides me. Blue lights? What's going on? And then I remember, yeah, blue lights. I cannot see my veins in blue lights. Ooh, they don't want junkies in off the street shooting up in the comfort of their restroom. It's not good for their clientele's comfort level. There's a lot of junkies on the street in Europe. For years, I would take my groups around Europe and they'd notice all these wasted junkies in the street and they'd think, these liberal Europeans, they got so many people with drug problems. No, they got the same as we do, 1% of their society. Theirs are just not in jail and they're still alive. We lose twice as many people to drug overdoses as Europeans do per capita. We lost 18,000 people last year, they lost 8,000 people. They just deal with it in a pragmatic harm reduction kind of way instead of a moralizing way. It's a choice a society has. Of course, a hotelier doesn't want people shooting up in their restrooms, okay? They have their blue lights. Across the street, you've got a machine that used to sell tobacco, jiggered now so it sells government-subsidized syringes, bolted to that bridge banister. This is in Switzerland, you'll see them everywhere. Syringes are almost free. Americans might say, that's just endorsing that kind of terrible activity. No, it's not. It's going to happen anyways. It's just making sure people don't share needles so they spread HIV, right? That's pragmatic harm reduction, and Europeans are all over that. Now, down the street, you've got a very sad scene, filled with wasted people waiting for it to open up. This is a heroin maintenance clinic. In Europe, the nickname is a Café Fix. It's a government-sponsored place where people can administer their heroin addiction. In much of Europe, the word for addiction is enslaved. These people are enslaved to hard drugs. Are they criminals or are they sick? Should they be dealing with lawyers and cops and prison, or should they be dealing with counselors and nurses and help? Two different approaches to it. We think there's going to be more people if we treat them compassionately. They think it's going to be more compassionate if we treat them compassionately. You got these heroin maintenance clinics all over Europe, and people don't have the overdoses there because they know where they can go to get their addiction maintained. Marijuana is a big deal here in the United States, and it's a big deal in Europe. It's a big topic of conversation in the United States because people are waking up to the travesty of this thing. In the United States, we got 80,000 people in jail right now for nonviolent marijuana convictions. We still arrest, even now, when 4 states have it legal for recreational, half the states allow it for medicine. You still have 800,000 people having run-ins with the law every year. These are not rich white guys. These are poor people, and these are people of color who can't afford that kind of a bump in the road. Now they can't get a loan, they can't get a job, they can't get into school. What does that accomplish? That's our drug war. I was a co-sponsor of Washington State's initiative to legalize, successful initiative to legalize marijuana. I paid a lot of money into that, and I spent a lot of time going around the state giving talks. It's one of the most proud things I've ever done. I'm not pro-pot, I'm pragmatic harm reduction. I'm pro-civil liberties. I understand it's the second biggest cash crop in our state after apples. Why don't we take all that profit away from gangs and organized crime, tax the heck out of it, and earmark those tens of millions of dollars of tax revenue for health projects and drug education and this kind of thing. And that's exactly what we're doing. I just had lunch with Jay Inslee, our governor, a few weeks ago. He is thankful we're not arresting 8,000 or 9,000 people a year like we were before that, and he can have his limited law enforcement resources focusing on real problems instead of petty marijuana convictions and so on. Now, a lot of Americans think, yeah, okay, marijuana's not that big of a deal, but more people are going to get into hard drugs if marijuana is legal. By every track record, there's no correlation between how strict the laws are and how many people smoke pot. In fact, in the Netherlands, a joint's about as exciting as a can of beer. This is a coffee shop. They sell marijuana there. You sit around, listen to music, and smoke pot and get high. Most Dutch people have not even smelled marijuana. It's just where the musicians and the hippies and the tourists go. Most Europeans know that the only thing gateway about marijuana is if it's illegal. Then you got to buy it from a criminal on the street who's got a vested interest in selling you something more profitable and more addictive. A lot of Americans think there's a whole reservoir of decent people that would love to ruin their lives smoking pot if only it was legal. The fact is, if you want to smoke pot, you do. If you're white and wealthy, it's easy, and if you're not white and wealthy, it's dangerous. And we're moving beyond that. So you're going to see it a lot in the future. You're going to see it a lot in the news. And the good news is that we've got a track record now. Use does not go up. Teen use does not go up. DUIs do not go up. You just arrest fewer people. You save a lot of money. You recognize a civil liberty. And you make progress. Pragmatic harm reduction. It's so exciting to learn about this. I can talk about it and get away with it because of my work. I don't need to be elected, and I can't be fired. Every once in a while, somebody says, boy, doesn't this hurt your business to be in favor of legalizing marijuana? And to be honest, every once in a while, somebody's going to say, yeah, I know what you think about marijuana, and we're not going to use your guidebooks, and we're not going to take your tours. All I can think is Europe's going to be more fun without you. So I do want to stress that my friends that helped us legalize pot here are not pot smokers. They are caring, smart people, and it's a very courageous thing that Washington State did. We didn't get it right perfectly, but we were, along with Colorado, the first state to legalize. Other states are learning from us, and we're going to put this wrong-minded prohibition of our age to rest in the next few years. Now, I enjoy comparing Europe with the United States. We are like sister societies. We're wealthy, we're Christian, we're pluralistic, we're democratic. We're all excited about government by, for, and of the people. But we do have some very amazing differences, and I try to analyze it. What is it that's different about our societies? And I think I've figured it out. At least this is my theory. In the United States, we're government by, for, and of the people via the corporations that we own. It's not a judgmental statement. It's just, as a society, we think the most important thing for our government to do is to create a good environment for the economy so our corporations can prosper. Okay. In Europe, they are government by, for, and of the people in spite of the corporations that they own. The government steps in and insists on honest accounting. We don't have honest accounting in our standard way of accounting. You don't have to pay for everything you bring in and so on. In Europe, you'd more likely to see a law that requires that you pay for the disposal of your car when you buy it. That's just honest. Somebody's got to pay for it. It's not going to happen unless you take care of it right now. In the United States, that wouldn't happen because it's not good for business, you see. So these are interesting things that we can compare. And when you go to Europe, you find Europe in the extreme is up in Scandinavia. If you really want to make a case study of it, look at Europe in the extreme. Go up to Scandinavia. It's the most literate, least church-going, most affluent, highest tax-paying, and most satisfied corner of Europe. All of those things are clearly, Scandinavia is the leader. What's with them up there? Now, it's not that they are without a religion. I believe their religion is humanism. Everybody getting together. When you see the main square in Stockholm or Oslo, you don't see a church, you see a city hall. It's a gathering place with a nave-like center where everybody gets together. You have a pulpit or a lectern. Instead of Bible stories on the big wall, you've got mosaics that tell great stories of heroic individuals who have contributed mightily to their society. They pay high taxes, and here in the United States, we've got an option, big bad government or little good government. In Scandinavia, they've got a third option, big good government. They pay high taxes willingly, and they have high expectations, and those expectations are generally met in their society, and that's their societal choice. I have certain people who are sounding boards for me in my travels, and I really value them. This is Ollie. You've probably seen him in my TV shows. He's a school teacher in a humble little village high in the Swiss Alps, a poor little town where everybody has the same last name. And Ollie's the big city guy with a university education that comes into town to educate the kids in the small town. And I get together with Ollie and his wife, Maria, and I just ask them questions. I remember asking Ollie and Maria, how can you Swiss people so docilely pay such high taxes? Because it was curious to me. And without missing a beat, they said, well, what's it worth to live in a society where there's no homelessness and no hunger and where everybody, regardless of how wealthy their parents are, have access to quality health care and education? Now, Ollie is not a crusader. He's considered a conservative, crusty old guy. But that's just a sensibility in Europe, and I think it's a complicated issue, and I'm certainly glad I'm running my business here, and I wouldn't live over there, but I think that we can learn a lot from them, and I think it's good to share notes. We are a society of compassionate, loving people, but one thing we're not very good about, maybe we're not very honest about, is the gap between rich and poor. It's huge within our own society. We're oblivious to it. And it's massive between the rich world and the poor world. And it's a pretty tough thing to get our brains around. When you travel, if you travel honestly, with your eyes open, your heart open, and your window down, you've got those grubby little fingers coming in, and you can't avoid it. There's some desperate poverty out there. And it's not just an anomaly. It's half of humanity struggling to make it work. And I really like learning about that. I've spent a lot of time in developing countries where you've got armed guards standing in front of every bank, every pharmacy, and every hotel. Any middle-class neighborhood in Central America has to pool its money to have a guard so the kids can go to the park safely. I'm starting to see that in our own society. I'm starting to see armed guards in front of banks. It scares me. I find it very sad. And I find that I've learned that even if you're motivated only by greed, if that's all you care about is the financial well-being of you and your loved ones, it's not a nice scenario. It's not a nice place to raise your kid. Even if you can afford those designer fortifications, you don't want to be behind that wall. And we are heading that way. We are heading that way. And when you travel, you realize that these beautiful little kids that we see south of the border are just as precious as our own kids. I mean, it's such a sucker punch for American politicians to talk about the kids. We all love the kids. But what about the kids south of the border? They're just, in God's eyes, they're just as precious as ours. Now, my little girl has $5,000 for straight teeth, and she's got money left over for whitener. And I noticed every kid in her class has braces. They could scrape together $5,000 because we want our kids to have straight teeth. That's right. That's not a guilt trip. We're a winning system. We work hard. Our kids get straight teeth. But that doesn't obliterate the reality that for half of the girls on this planet, half of the little boys on this planet, they don't have moms for half of their waking hours because they're out walking for water, and it gets worse every year. And for the cost of 2 sets of braces, you could drill a well in that dusty little town, and those moms could have running water right there. That's an opportunity. It's not a guilt trip. Every day when those moms did not walk across the county, but just walked across the square and pumped that water, what would they think? They'd think, God bless America. God bless America. And they'd have their water. That's just an opportunity. That's called soft power. We've got hard power and more than enough of it. Every time we do a budget deal, the military is taken care of. Have you noticed that? It takes $1 million to keep one soldier in Afghanistan. We need to have soldiers there, but we need to make a cost-benefit analysis. With that $1 million, you could drill 100 wells in 100 thirsty towns, and all those moms could stay home, and maybe that would do more for our national security than having one more soldier in Afghanistan. I don't know. It's just something to think about. It's not going to happen, frankly, because nobody makes any money here when you drill a well there. And a lot of people make money here when you pay $1 million to have a soldier in Afghanistan. The power of love is so clear when you travel all over this beautiful planet. And as a tour guide, it's such a joy and a privilege and a wonderful challenge to expose our travelers to these different ways of thinking. Let me just close with one of my favorite lessons as a tour guide. It's in Eastern Turkey. I'm with my group. I always wanted my group to get to know one of those whirling dervishes. And I found a dervish, and I don't remember the exact words, but I'll kind of paraphrase what went on, and you can kind of see the adventure. I found this dervish, and I said, hi, I'm an American tour guide. I got 20 people on the bus. We'd love to watch you, whirl. And he said, I'm not a photo op. I'm a monk. I'm a dervish. But if I can explain to you what I'm doing, I'll let you watch me pray. I said, perfect. So we went up onto his rooftop. The sun was setting. He had his outfit on. And he said, I'm a dervish. You Christians would call that a monk. I follow Mevlana. Or you know him as Rumi. He's kind of like the Saint Francis of Islam. Francis, the saint of love, and everybody can get his brains around it. There's everybody like Saint Francis. Mevlana is the teacher of love. 5 times a day, I get into a meditative trance by whirling, and I meditate on the teaching of Mevlana. I put one foot in my hometown, my family, my loved ones. The other foot goes around, acknowledging the beautiful diversity on God's great creation. The variety. One hand goes up and accepts the love of our Maker. The other hand goes down, and like the spout of a tea kettle, it showers God's love on his creation, on my family, on my hometown, and all across this beautiful world. 5 times a day, he loses himself in that idea, and he becomes a conduit of God's love. And I watched him, his head tilting over, his robe billowing out, losing himself in that beautiful idea. And then for me as a tour guide and a travel teacher, I watched the faces of my wonderstruck travelers. The fear, the freakiness was melting away. And they realized, this man makes a little more sense now. He's a little less scary. And they will take that home. And when they take that home, they become a little better attached to the rest of this planet, a little less afraid of it, a little more of a global perspective. That's the most beautiful souvenir, taking home a broader perspective. And then when you implement that broader perspective here in this beautiful country of ours, you're making travel a political act. Thank you very much. Thank you.